What happens when one of comedy's sharpest minds sits down with daytime television's most unpredictable panel, only for a casual conversation to spiral into a full-blown on-air meltdown that left producers scrambling and viewers absolutely stunned? It only took 45 seconds of Denise Welch questioning Ricky Gervais's comedy style before the entire interview exploded into chaos, ending with security escorting Britain's most famous comedian off the set. While cameras captured every shocking second, the Loose Women's studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Audience members filled the seats, cameras positioned perfectly to capture every angle, and the panel sat ready behind their iconic desk. Denise Welch sat front and center, flanked by her fellow panelists Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan. The show's producers had booked Ricky Gervais to discuss his latest project, expecting the usual banter and laughs that came with having a comedian on the show. Nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold. Ricky walked onto the set with his trademark confident stride, waving to the audience as they applauded. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans, looking relaxed and ready for what he assumed would be a straightforward interview. He shook hands with each panelist, exchanged pleasantries, and settled into the guest chair positioned slightly apart from the main desk. The studio lights felt warm on his face as he adjusted his microphone. "Welcome, Ricky. Lovely to have you here," Ruth said with a warm smile, shuffling her notes on the desk. "Thanks for having me," Ricky replied, flashing that familiar grin that had made him a household name. Denise leaned forward slightly, her expression already carrying a hint of something more confrontational than welcoming. "So, Ricky, we wanted to talk about your comedy. You've built quite a career on pushing boundaries, haven't you?" The way she emphasized the word pushing made Ricky smile, falter just slightly. "Well, I suppose you could say that. I've always believed comedy should make people think as well as laugh. Think or feel uncomfortable." Denise shot back almost immediately, her tone shifting from conversational to accusatory in seconds. The studio audience felt noticeably quieter. Ruth glanced at Denise with a look that suggested this wasn't the direction they'd planned for the interview. Colleen shifted in her seat, clearly sensing the tension building. "Comedy has always been about challenging perspectives," Ricky explained, maintaining his composure. "Sometimes that means making people a bit uncomfortable, yes, but that's different from being deliberately cruel." Denise let out a short laugh that sounded more dismissive than amused. "Is it though? Because I've watched your specials, and I'm not sure I see the difference. You seem to enjoy making fun of people." Janet Street Porter jumped in, trying to steer things back. "I think what Ricky does is satire, Denise. There's a long tradition of that in British comedy." "Satire," Denise repeated, drawing out the word mockingly. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like punching down at vulnerable people for cheap laughs." Ricky's jaw tightened visibly. He took a breath before responding. "I've never punched down in my life. My comedy targets ignorance, prejudice, and hypocrisy. If you think that's punching down, maybe you're not paying attention to what I'm actually saying." "Oh, I'm paying attention," Denise said, her voice rising slightly. "I'm paying attention to the fact that you've built a career on offending people and then hiding behind free speech when anyone calls you out." The other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ruth tried to intervene. "Perhaps we should talk about your new project, Ricky. What can you tell us about that?" But Denise wasn't finished. She kept her eyes locked on Ricky. "No, I want to understand this. How do you justify some of the things you've said? Do you even care that you've hurt people?" Ricky leaned forward now, his relaxed demeanor completely gone. "Hurt people? Let me tell you something about hurt. Do you know what actually hurts people? Censorship. Being told they can't express themselves, being made to feel like their thoughts and opinions don't matter, that's what hurts people. So everyone should just be allowed to say whatever they want with no consequences?" Denise challenged. "I never said no consequences," Ricky countered. "I said people should be free to express themselves. If you don't like what someone says, you're free to disagree. You're free to not watch, but you're not free to silence them." Denise's face flushed red. "That's such a privileged position to take. Easy for you to say when you're not the one being targeted." "Privileged?" Ricky's voice rose now, matching her intensity. "You're sitting here on national television using your platform to attack me for having opinions you disagree with, and you're calling me privileged?" Colleen attempted to interject. "Maybe we're all getting a bit heated here. Let's take a breath and—" "No, let him answer," Denise interrupted, waving her hand dismissively at Colleen. I want to hear how he justifies his behavior. My behavior? Ricky looked genuinely incredulous now. What behavior are you talking about? Being a comedian? Telling jokes? Having opinions? Your behavior of thinking you're above criticism, Denise snapped. Your behavior of acting like the rules don't apply to you because you're some comedy genius. I've never said I'm above criticism, Ricky said, his voice tight with frustration. You're literally criticizing me right now. What I'm saying is that disagreement isn't the same as being harmful. And shutting down conversation because you don't like what someone says is cowardly. The word cowardly hung in the air like a bomb. Denise's expression turned cold. Did you just call me a coward? I called shutting down conversation cowardly, Ricky clarified. But if the shoe fits, how dare you? Denise cut him off, her voice sharp enough to make several audience members flinch. You come on this show, you sit in that chair, and you have the audacity to insult me? Ruth tried desperately to regain control. Denise, Ricky, let's all just calm down for a moment. But the situation was spiraling too fast. Janet Street Porter looked utterly shocked, her mouth hanging open slightly as she watched the confrontation unfold. Colleen had her hand pressed against her forehead, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. I'm not insulting you, Ricky said, though his tone suggested he was very close to doing exactly that. I'm pointing out the hypocrisy of inviting someone on your show specifically to attack them and then acting offended when they defend themselves. Attack you? Denise's voice went up another octave. I asked you, legitimate, questions about your comedy. If you can't handle basic scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye. Basic scrutiny? Ricky laughed bitterly. You've been hostile from the moment I sat down. This isn't an interview, it's an ambush. Oh please, Denise scoffed. You're so used to everyone laughing at your jokes and telling you how brilliant you are that the second someone challenges you, you fall apart. I'm not falling apart, Ricky said firmly, but I'm also not going to sit here and be lectured about comedy by someone who clearly doesn't understand it. That statement made Denise stand up from her chair. The other panelists looked alarmed. Ruth reached out as if to pull Denise back down, but Denise shook her off. I don't understand comedy? Denise's voice was shaking now with anger. I've been in this industry for decades. I've worked with some of the greatest talents in British television, and you have the nerve to sit there and tell me I don't understand comedy? Ricky remained seated but looked up at her with an expression that mixed defiance and disbelief. Then you should know that comedy dies when you start deciding what people can and cannot joke about. You should know that offense is subjective and that just because something bothers you doesn't mean it's wrong. What bothers me, Denise said, pointing her finger at him, is arrogant men who think they can say whatever they want and everyone else just has to deal with it. And what bothers me, Ricky replied, standing up now to face her, is people who invite guests onto their show under false pretenses just so they can grandstand and virtue signal to their audience. The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members seemed frozen in place. Ruth looked at the producers off camera with an expression that screamed for help. Janet had both hands covering her mouth. Colleen just stared straight ahead, seemingly in shock. Virtue signal? Denise repeated, her voice dangerously. Quiet now. Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it? Ricky challenged. You're not interested in an actual conversation. You just want to look good by taking down someone you've already decided is bad. Get out, Denise said suddenly. Everyone stared at her. Ruth found her voice. Denise? We're in the middle of filming. I said get out. Denise repeated, louder this time. I'm not doing this interview anymore. I won't sit here and be disrespected on my own show. Your show? Janet interjected. Denise, it's all of our show. I don't care. Denise, cut her off. He needs to leave. Now. Ricky held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. Fine by me. I've got better things to do than waste my time here anyway. Oh, we're wasting your time? Denise's voice dripped with sarcasm. How terrible for you. Poor Ricky Gervais, having to actually answer questions like a normal person instead of just being worshipped. This is insane, Ricky muttered, reaching up to remove his microphone. You invited me here. You started this entire thing. And now you're acting like I'm the problem. You are the problem, Denise insisted. People like you who think they're untouchable, who think they can say anything they want without consequences, you're exactly what's wrong with this industry. Ricky paused in unclipping his mic to stare at her. And people like you, who think they have the right to police everyone else's speech, who get offended on behalf of others who didn't even ask for your help, You're what's wrong with free expression. Security! Denise called out suddenly. Can we get security in here, please? Ruth stood up quickly. Denise, that's not necessary. I'm calling security, Denise stated firmly. I want him removed from the studio. Ricky laughed in disbelief. You're calling security? I'm leaving anyway. You don't need to. I want you escorted out, Denise interrupted. I want everyone to see exactly what kind of person you are. Two security guards appeared from the wings, looking extremely uncomfortable with the situation. They approached Ricky hesitantly, clearly not wanting to be part of whatever this had become. This is ridiculous, Ricky said to them. I'm going. You don't need to escort me anywhere. Please, sir, one of the guards said quietly, just come with us. Ricky looked at Denise one more time. You know what the really funny thing is? You've just proved every point I've ever made about people who can't handle different opinions. You've shown everyone watching exactly who the real bully is here. Get him out of my sight, Denise said, her voice cold. The security guards gently took Ricky by the arms, though he was already walking toward the exit on his own. As they moved through the studio, Ricky called back over his shoulder. Good luck with the rest of your show. I'm sure it'll be riveting watching you all agree with each other. The cameras continued, rolling as the guards led him off set. The audience sat in stunned silence. Nobody quite knew what to do or say. Ruth looked down at her notes as if hoping they might contain instructions for this unprecedented situation. Janet slowly lowered her hands from her mouth, her eyes wide. Colleen remained motionless, still staring straight ahead. Denise stood beside the desk, breathing heavily, her face still flushed with anger. She seemed to realize that every camera in the studio was pointed at her, capturing her reaction for broadcast. She attempted to compose herself, smoothing down her hair and straightening her jacket. Well, she finally said, her voice not quite steady. I think we all just saw what happens when you challenge certain people. They can't handle it. Ruth cleared her throat. Perhaps we should take a break. We have a commercial coming up anyway. No, Denise said sharply. We're not taking a break. We're going to continue with the show as planned. Denise. Colleen spoke up for the first time in minutes. Maybe Ruth's right. We should all just take a moment to… I said we're continuing, Denise insisted, sitting back down at the desk with a heavy thud. I'm not going to let him disrupt our entire show. Janet found her voice, though it came out uncertain. That was quite intense. I'm not sure the audience signed up for that level of confrontation. He started it, Denise said defensively. He came in here with an attitude from the beginning. Ruth gave her a look. Denise, I don't think that's entirely fair. You did come at him quite strongly right from the start. I asked him questions, Denise countered. If he couldn't handle questions, he shouldn't have agreed to come on. Those weren't just questions, Colleen said quietly. You were pretty accusatory. Denise turned to look at her fellow panelists and for the first time seemed to realize that none of them were backing her up. Are you all seriously taking his side? Right now? We're not taking sides, Ruth said carefully. But we all just witnessed what happened. And I think we need to acknowledge that things got out of hand on both sides. I can't believe this, Denise said, shaking her head. He was completely disrespectful. He called me a coward. He insulted this show. And you're all acting like I'm the one who did something wrong. You called security on a guest, Janet pointed out. That's never happened before. Not in all the years we've been doing this show. Because we've never had a guest be that rude before, Denise argued. He defended himself, Colleen said. You kept pushing, and when he pushed back, you couldn't handle it. Denise looked genuinely shocked by this assessment. I was doing my job. I was asking him tough questions that needed to be asked. There's a difference between tough questions and an interrogation, Ruth said gently. And I think maybe that line got blurred today. The studio remained tense and awkward. The audience members whispered among themselves, clearly processing what they'd just witnessed. The crew moved around nervously, unsure whether to prepare for the next segment or wait for further instructions. Can we just get through the rest of the show, please? Denise asked, her voice tired now. The anger had drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like embarrassment, though she'd never admit it. Of course, Ruth said. We'll move on to our next topic. But everyone in that studio knew that nothing would be the same after what had just transpired. The other panelists kept exchanging glances throughout the remainder of the show, each one knowing they'd been part of something unprecedented. Denise tried to carry on as if everything was normal, but her laugh sounded forced, her comments felt stiff, and the natural chemistry the panel usually shared was completely gone. In the guest chair where Ricky had been sitting just minutes ago, there was nothing but empty space, a physical reminder of how quickly a simple interview could spiral completely out of control. As the show continued, audience members couldn't stop whispering to each other about what they'd seen. Some pulled out their phones, immediately texting friends and family about the chaos they'd just witnessed live. Others simply sat in disbelief, replaying the confrontation in their minds, trying to figure out exactly when things had gone from a normal interview to a full-blown meltdown. The tension on set was palpable. Every time there was a pause between segments, the panelists sat in uncomfortable silence. Ruth kept trying to make light conversation during the breaks, but her attempts fell flat. Janet pretended to study her notes intensely, avoiding eye contact with Denise. Colleen fidgeted with her jewelry, clearly wishing the show would just end already. Denise maintained her composure on camera, but during commercial breaks, her mask would slip slightly. She'd take sharp breaths, drink water with slightly shaking hands, and stare at nothing in particular. The other panelists noticed, but said nothing, each one dealing with their own thoughts about what had happened. The producers in the control room were in full crisis mode. Phones were ringing constantly as they tried to figure out how to handle the situation. Should they edit the segment before broadcast? Should they address it head-on? Should they issue a statement? Every decision felt loaded with potential consequences. Meanwhile, the crew members who had witnessed everything firsthand were already spreading word throughout the building. By the time the show ended, everyone at the studio knew exactly what had transpired. People who hadn't even been in the room were talking about it, each retelling slightly different, slightly more dramatic than the last. Back on set, as the final segment wrapped up and the show's theme music played, the panelists said their goodbyes to the audience with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. The moment the camera stopped rolling, the facade dropped completely. Denise stood up immediately, gathering her things without a word to the others. Ruth reached out to touch her arm, but Denise pulled away. "I need some air," was all she said before walking off set, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The other three panelists remained at the desk for a moment, finally able to speak freely. "That was absolutely mental," Janet said, breaking the silence. "In all my years on television, I've never seen anything like that." "She really went after him from the start," Colleen agreed. "I felt uncomfortable watching it, and I was sitting right there." Ruth sighed deeply. "I tried to redirect several times, but once they both got going, there was no stopping it. The thing is," Janet continued, "I don't even think Ricky came in with a bad attitude. He seemed fine at first. It was Denise who immediately went on the attack." "I know," Ruth said quietly. "I saw the same thing. And now we're going to have to deal with the fallout." Indeed, the fallout was already beginning. Audience members were filing out of the studio, immediately calling friends and posting on social media about what they'd just seen. Within minutes, hashtags related to the incident began trending. People who'd been there described the tension, the shouting, the moment security was called. Stagehands cleaned up the set, shaking their heads and muttering to each other about the drama. Some laughed about it, finding humor in the absurdity. Others felt genuinely troubled by how aggressive things had become. In her dressing room, Denise sat alone, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was still perfect, her hair still styled flawlessly, but her eyes betrayed the turmoil she felt inside. She kept replaying the conversation in her head, trying to figure out when exactly she'd lost control of the situation. She'd been for you, genuinely believed she was asking important questions, holding someone accountable. But the reactions from her fellow panelists, the looks on the audience members' faces, the way the whole thing had spiraled, it all gnawed at her. Had she been too aggressive? Had she let her personal feelings about his comedy style cloud her judgment? But no, she told herself firmly. She'd been right to challenge him. He'd been defensive and rude. He'd insulted her. He'd insulted the show. Calling security had been justified. Everything she'd done had been justified. Even as she thought this, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubt. But Denise pushed it away, straightened her shoulders, and began removing her microphone pack. She'd stand by her actions. She had to. Down the hallway, Ruth, Janet, and Colleen had gathered in one of the production offices, debriefing with the show's producers. "This is going to be everywhere by tonight," one producer said, running his hands through his hair. "We need to decide how to handle it." "What's there to handle?" Janet asked. "It happened. It's done. We can't take it back. But we can control the narrative," another producer suggested. "We could release a statement, explain what happened from our perspective. Or we could just let it speak for itself," Colleen said. Anything we say now is just going to add fuel to the fire. Ruth nodded in agreement. People will make up their own minds about what they saw. Trying to spin it one way or another will just make us look worse. The conversation continued, going in circles, with no clear consensus on the best path forward. Eventually, everyone agreed to sleep on it and reconvene in the morning with clearer heads. As the building slowly emptied out for the day, the ghost of the confrontation still lingered in every corner. The empty set, the darkened lights, the chair where Ricky had sat before everything exploded, all of it served as a reminder of how quickly things could fall apart. The incident had lasted less than 15 minutes in total, but its impact would reverberate far beyond that brief moment. Everyone involved knew that this wasn't just another controversial interview. This was something different, something bigger, something that would be talked about and analyzed for a long time to come. In that guest chair, where so many celebrities had sat before and would sit again, there was now an invisible mark, a reminder of the day when a simple conversation turned into one of the most dramatic moments in the show's history. The empty space seemed to hold all the tension, all the anger, all the chaos that had erupted there just hours before. And somewhere outside the studio, Ricky Gervais was undoubtedly already crafting jokes about the whole experience, turning his removal from the set into material that would probably make audiences laugh for years to come. Because that's what comedians do. They take the uncomfortable moments, the confrontational moments, the moments that make everyone else cringe, and they find the humor in them. But for everyone who'd been in that studio, who'd watched it unfold in real time, who'd felt the tension crackling in the air like electricity, there was nothing funny about what had happened. There was only the surreal feeling of having witnessed something unprecedented, something that had crossed lines nobody had expected to be crossed. The show would go on. It always did. There would be more guests, more topics, more discussions. But none of the panelists would ever forget the day Ricky Gervais was escorted off the set by security. None of them would forget the look on Denise's face when she'd stood up and demanded he leave. None of them would forget the sound of his voice as he'd called back that final comment before disappearing through the studio doors. Most of all, none of them would forget the feeling of watching a colleague lose control of an interview so completely that it ended with security involvement. It was a cautionary tale about letting personal feelings override professional conduct, about the importance of maintaining composure even when emotions run high, about the fine line between holding someone accountable and simply attacking them. As the last lights in the studio were switched off, that empty guest chair sat in darkness, a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded around it. Tomorrow, someone else would sit there. The show would continue, but the memory of what had happened would linger, a reminder that even in the controlled environment of a television studio, with cameras rolling and producers watching, sometimes things spiral completely out of control in ways nobody can predict or prevent. And in the end, that's what made the whole incident so shocking, so memorable, so impossible to look away from. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. It was real people having real reactions, real emotions boiling over, real consequences unfolding in real time. For better or worse, everyone watching had gotten a glimpse behind the polished facade of television production and seen the messy, complicated reality underneath. The question that hung in the air as everyone went their separate ways was simple but profound. What happens now? How does a show recover from something like this? How did the people involved move forward? How does Denise face her colleagues after what happened? How did the other panelists address it with her, if at all? These questions had no easy answers. And as night fell on the studio, those questions remained, waiting for tomorrow to bring whatever resolution or continued chaos was yet to come. But one thing was certain, nobody who'd been there would ever forget the day a simple comedy interview turned into one of the most dramatic confrontations in